Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be waiting just a few moments to let everyone join before kicking off. Thank you to everyone who's joined. We'll be getting started in just a minute or two as we wait for everyone to join. Right, thank you, everyone. My name is Mary Ann Bates. I'm the Executive Director here at the Cradle-to-Career Data System. A big thank you to all of our task force participants for being here. We're going to kick off the second meeting of this eTranscript task force. And to do so, I'm happy to turn it over to Kathy. As we discussed in the first meeting, we're thrilled that WestEd and Kathy have agreed to facilitate this task force for us. So I'll be turning it over to her for the meeting facilitation today, and just want to extend my sincere gratitude to all of our task force members who are spending their time with us in this meeting today and in this work more broadly in the coming months. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann. So Mari, if you could go ahead and share the slides. In the meantime, what I'm going to ask is that all of our task force members change your name so that we know what your organizational affiliation is. And the way you do that is you go to the top right-hand side of your image, and there's 3 dots. And if you click on that, you'll see an option called rename, and you can then add in which organization you represent. So welcome, everyone. Go ahead to the next slide. So as we talked about in our meeting last month, there's a large number of ideas that we're going to be covering in this task force. And so today we're going to be focusing more specifically on the issues of dual enrollment, the concept of applying or putting a link in the application forms to share data about college courses that students have taken, especially dual enrollment students, and a little bit about the concept of transcript standards. So if you click the next slide, Mari, you can see that this is the portion that we're really focusing on. So it's the upper right-hand corner, which is the relationship between high school transcripts, application forms, and these 2 tools that we already have in the state that help to pass electronic transcripts. That's californiacolleges.edu and eTranscript California. So for members of the public that are joining us, on the C2C website is a background paper that gives some information about all of this. You can be referencing that throughout this meeting, but also in the future if you want to share with others the ideas that we're discussing here. Next slide, please. So this is specifically what we're going to be doing at today's meeting. So in a moment, I'm going to explain to members of the public how you can share your input. Then we're going to dive into the question of what is dual enrollment. There's actually a lot of different ways that this term gets used, and ways that may not be inclusive of all the ways that students take early college credit. So we're going to be asking an expert in the field, Naomi Castro from Career Ladders Project, to help us get oriented to those issues. And then we're going to be diving into the idea of how you do an application integration, basically how you make it possible for students to allow for their academic records, or their course records, or other things to be shared as part of filling out an application form offered by our public agencies. And we're going to look at a case study of how this has already been done for high school related information. Then we're going to talk about sort of like what that might mean for the problems that Naomi is going to be walking us through that dual enrollment students tend to experience. And then we're going to wrap up our time by talking about transcript standards and implications based on the big ideas that we have about how we could do a better job of passing information both in academic contexts as well as trying to support skills-based hiring. So a lot of stuff that we're covering today. Next slide. So for members of the public, we are going to be using the Q&A feature of Zoom to get your thoughts during the course of the meeting. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option that says Q&A, and it's got two little like dialogue bubbles that are showing up above that. So throughout the meeting, you can click on that and you can post your questions. Wested, our team will be taking a look, and we'll have folks who'll be piping up and sharing your questions as we're at the appropriate parts of today's conversation. Also, as you'll note, there's an email address here where if you've got more formal comment that you want to make, that you can post, and we'll be including that as we write up the notes from today to make sure that your questions can be answered to the degree possible. So that's how we're handling public comment. Okay, next slide. All right, well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Naomi Castro from Career Ladders Project. I think that she is hands down one of the best known experts on dual enrollment in the state. She can explain what's going on from a student point of view. She can get down and dirty with the data. So Naomi, thank you so much for being here to help us get oriented today.
Thank you so much. Kathy, can I have you introduce me everywhere, please? I am Naomi Castro. I've done dual enrollment from the college side, from the high school side, and as a student. So I love it, and it also keeps me up at night. If we can have the next slide, please. So we're going to start off with some definitions because we throw a lot of different words around when we're talking about dual enrollment, especially in California. But we're going to make it really simple. And this definition is like in legislation, right? And so dual enrollment, it's simple. It is any time a student is enrolled both in high school and in college at the same time. It's basically their enrollment status is dual, right? It's two. And there's lots of different ways, and we'll jump into some of those ways. And we call them all kinds of different things, but we'll get some clarity on that. But if we can jump to the next slide, for the task force members, I have a question for you. And if you could pop an answer into the chat. How has dual enrollment had an impact on your life, or has it? So if you yourself or your child or a learner you might know has participated in dual enrollment, let us know in the chat, and you can drop in 1 or 2 words about how that experience was. Feel free to use emojis too. Anyone has participated in dual enrollment, or maybe a niece or a nephew, maybe your own child. All right. Okay, so we're getting some comments in there. Very positive. Someone's son took 4 different community college courses. Excellent. I'll give it just another second here. Yeah, get ahead, get ahead. I love that. Niece got a year of college in high school. That's fantastic. 1 year down. Woohoo. My niece took dual enrollment courses. 3 kids, they all did dual enrollment. Okay, this is excellent. Excellent. Please keep adding those into the chat. I'm super curious. I'm going to be looking back at it. They'll go into the record of all of this. Oh, one of our panelists had 2 full-time dual enrollment years in her last 2 years of high school. That's fantastic. I love it. But let's go on to the next slide. Keep popping those experiences in. We're now going to turn it over for a few minutes to some students from the Central Valley. So go ahead and play the video.
Hi, my name is Alexis Meneses, and I'm from Design Science.
Well, my name is Lina Iboa, and I went to Kerman High School.
I really didn't like geometry, and I ended up failing some of the tests, so I didn't feel like math wasn't for me.
I had B's and C's. I was not a straight A student.
In sophomore year, that's when I went through Algebra 2, and as soon as I got there, it felt different from geometry. And then I asked my teachers, what would I be able to do to take calculus?
Dual enrollment classes, I took approximately 12, and they were economics, English, and math, and many more.
They guided me through the path and said that it wouldn't be easy, but they could totally see me doing it.
Those college courses motivated me to study more and see them as like a more important thing, so that helped me in high school as well.
So growing up, my parents and I didn't have much money. So throughout my elementary and middle school years, I would end up helping them in the fields, which would put a huge strain on both of us because we wanted to get money, but then I also wanted to do good in school. So when dual enrollment came around, I realized it was free college.
I am also going to be the first high school and college graduate in a few generations because my grandparents or my parents did not graduate from high school or any elementary schools.
So I stopped working in the fields with my parents, and I'm now the first generation in my family to go to college.
When I first signed up for a dual enrollment class, I felt nervous but excited. Nervous because I felt like it was going to be too hard for me because I was a high school student. And I felt excited because it gave me an opportunity to have a small college experience.
So I ended up going to office hours almost every day, which helped me get that A in trigonometry.
No, I'm not nervous anymore.
So counselors are probably one of your biggest resources, and you can go talk to them whenever you need to for any support.
If you feel like your class is getting hard, there is tutoring that you can email your teacher. They have office hours as well that can help you out with that class.
If you're trying to go into dual enrollment, don't be scared. It helps you get a feel of what college will look like in a couple years.
The funnest thing I found of taking college courses in high school was that it made me more confident and less scary of going into college, as well as feeling like an adult.
Due to dual enrollment, I was able to graduate high school with an associate's degree in mathematics.
And I would highly recommend first generation students to take these classes because it will benefit them as well as helping their parents see that there is more opportunities for us than there was for them.
Yay! Thank you so much for listening to those students with attentive ears. Let's go on to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So, okay, so why are we doing this? And we've had all these great folks chiming in about their great experiences or family members. Well, the research is pretty unanimous. And it's decades of research across the country. And then there's also a growing body of California research. Increased high school graduation for students who participate, quicker time to degree. It saves students and families money and time. And then there's a particular style of dual enrollment in California, CCAP, and that's where we see that definition of dual enrollment in the CCAP I can't remember if it's in the intent language or in the legislation specifically, but CCAP is a style of dual enrollment we'll go into a little bit more in a minute. But in that style of dual enrollment, we see equity gaps dramatically narrowing in California. So that is really exciting. And 51% of CCAP students go on to a community college once they leave high school. So that's also very exciting. And degree-seeking CCAP students complete those gateway math and English courses in their first year at a higher rate than students who didn't participate in dual enrollment, and also higher than other kinds of dual enrollment students. So this is all very exciting stuff. Let's jump on to the next slide. And then in California, of course, we have some direction, right? We have the governor's roadmap for community colleges that calls for increasing the percent of students earning at least 12 units of college credit while they're still in high school, and using dual enrollment to help close those equity gaps. And in the Chancellor's Office, Vision 2030, same goals, increase the number of students getting 12 or more units in of college credit while in high school, and close equity gaps. So we are coming to alignment. We've got a mission, we've got a charge. Let's go on to the next slide. There's so many different ways of doing dual enrollment in California. And there's a wonderful Chancellor's Office memo that came out recently, the Empowerment Memo from co-written by the Academic Senate. And you can find this chart is linked in there. But from very, very structured, like middle college high schools that are located on the college campus, very exciting, lots of structure. It's right in the college itself. Early college high schools, which are very similar, but they can be on a high school campus. And then two kinds of dual enrollment that are both governed by agreements between the high school and the college. CCAP is one of those that's focused on pathways and focused on students who might be underrepresented in college. And then non-CCAP MOUs, which traditionally have been used a lot for CTE. And then on the far side, we have individual students coming on their own. Sometimes we call that concurrent, enrichment, academic advancement, but those students don't really have a program surrounding them and supporting them. They've just kind of figured it out. So next slide. So there's some challenges. When we have two systems that are trying to work so closely together that weren't really made to do that, you come up with a lot of challenges, right? And so we did a survey. We had 300 recipients, 80 colleges represented, of what were the biggest challenges folks were seeing in the field. And the enrollment process was the #1 challenge, especially CCC apply. It's adult students find it challenging, high school students find it very challenging. But there were also other challenges named, like aligning high school and college schedules, having enough personnel to support students in enrollment and also academically, and then gatekeeping behavior or a mindset about that some students shouldn't be in dual enrollment and some students should. And so those were all some of the challenges. But we're going to talk about challenges with transcription. So let's jump onto that. So you can imagine university admissions is a big challenge when we talk about dual enrollment. A lot of the times students in dual enrollment might not immerse themselves on the community college campus after high school. So they don't really know how to get their transcripts. Like it's not kind of part of their regular daily schedule. So it's challenging, but they need to get them to the university. And then there's another challenge that has to do with dual credit. So dual enrollment doesn't automatically mean dual credit. High schools have that purview of to accept that credit from the college course or not, and where to apply it. And so then you can imagine they transcript it on the high school side in all kinds of different ways. There's a lack of uniformity. And then, our four-year colleagues would like it to be a little easier to see. And we want to make sure we get students the credit, so we're trying stuff. But the other challenge with that is when students want to get the dual credit, their high schools don't always know that they're taking college classes, especially those students who are doing it on their own. So being able to just kind of automate how the community college sends the transcript back to the high school, and then that credit gets awarded on the high school side could be incredibly helpful. It could be a game changer. And oh my gosh, I think that's the fastest I've ever done an overview of dual enrollment. But I think we have a couple minutes left for questions. Sorry, Kathy, I was on Zoom.
No, I really encourage any task force members that have any questions for you to ask them.
And Naomi, we did have one question from the Q&A from the public, providing a reference for where the statute is that defines dual enrollment, where that could be found.
Sure, it's in the section of Ed Code that's AB 288. I will have to find it for you and send it on. But it's also mentioned in the very first chancellor's memo back in 2016 after AB 288 came out, and it said, finally, we have a definition of dual enrollment in statute.
When we do the notes for today, we can include that reference, and also because of the way chat works with webinars, there's a bunch of links that our colleagues have been sharing about where you can find some of the resources that Naomi was describing. So we'll make sure that those show up in the notes as well, so members of the public can read some of these really helpful documents. Looks like Laura has a question.
Quick question. If students are not clear that they can get credit sometimes when they're applying to community colleges or four-year universities, are there things that we can be doing when students enter dual enrollment from the high school side to help them understand? And are there ever, I mean, as much as this should also be exploratory for students to explore their interests, do they also understand that this is a college course going in, and that they will that will relay into their post-secondary transcripts?
That is a fantastic question. And this is one of the reasons I really, really love all those more structured programs. So where we see that as more of a challenge is when students are coming on their own. Also, counselors have told us that they often kind of overload on that one area of general eds that's like social sciences, because they all want to take psychology and sociology, and then they take more classes than they need to fulfill those credits. But when we have the programs, especially CCAP, especially our early and middle colleges, they design pathways for the students. So they know what courses they're taking, they know where they lead to on the college side, and ideally they know where they lead to on the high school side. And our students, our colleagues at Merced Union High School District and Merced College, Community College, have a beautiful equivalency chart that they made together, because before that equivalency, students were getting different kinds of credit depending on the high school they went to, even in the same district. So they got together, they got the counselors together, they made a nice equivalency chart. It says what high school credit they get for what college classes, if it's UC or CSU transferable, and if it meets A through G requirements. So more of that is what we'd like to see.
So we've got a question about whether high school articulated courses are included in the definition of dual enrollment.
You know, I think articulation is fantastic and wonderful, but it's not dual enrollment. Colleges and high schools handle it a little bit differently across the state, and it can be transcripted. So it is for sure high school credit, and it can be college credit. And then the way it's transcripted notates that it's credit via examination. And so sometimes the 4 years may take that as major credit, like if it's a business 1 class, or they may decide to take it as elective. And that really depends on those agreements with the 4 years. So it's not, it's early college credit, but it's not quite dual enrollment.
All right, we need to move on to our next area. So now that we've heard a little bit more about how dual enrollment functions, what we want to talk through is this possibility of making it easier to pass information to a college, whether it's a community college or a 4-year institution, about a student's dual enrollment experience. So next slide, please. So to sort of set this up, we thought it would be useful to describe an already successful example that we have of putting a transcript service into a college application. And so for this, I'm inviting 2 different folks to speak. Mary Aguayo, who works with the California Colleges Guidance Initiative, which runs californiacolleges.edu, as well as April Gromo from CSU. So I'll turn it over now.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So the California College Guidance Initiative, as Kathy shared, runs californiacolleges.edu, which is the state's official college and career planning platform. We're a state-funded nonprofit, and we are charged to serve all 3.2 million 6th to 12th grade public school students in the state of California. We're also a component of the Cradle-to-Career data system as part of its operational tools. We really exist to smooth the path to college and career for students, and we do so with an equitable focus. We know that the types of barriers that we're discussing here in this committee really disproportionately impact students who are first generation, low income, and students of color. And so we really work to build systems to smooth that pathway. We do this through planning, through capacity building in our K-12 system, and through provision of data-informed tools. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about how the California College Guidance Initiative impacts this work, we're looking to build systematized college and career knowledge development. So we provide lessons for students in 6th to 12th grade about what careers they might choose and what colleges might be of interest for them. How do they navigate those processes? And we also develop student records, which follow students to really streamline their experience and inform their decisions. This can impact their high school course placement, help them maximize that A to G subject area completion, and help students keep track of their CSU and UC eligibility rates. For those folks who are not familiar with A to G subject area courses, those are the ways that the course management portal tracks whether or not a student has completed college preparatory English, math, and other subjects. So these are really helpful for students that are seeking to gain admission into the university systems in California. We also provide information to the California community colleges, the CSU, the UC, and CSAC that supports admission, placement, advising, financial aid, and supportive services. To focus here today, we want to talk a little bit about who we do that with and how that works for the CSU. Next slide, please. So currently, we're serving 59% of the state's high school students through our partner districts, and another 30% of the state are in a pre-partnership stage. So when districts partner with the California College Guidance Initiative, they have a formal data sharing agreement with us that enables students to access transcript-informed tools. That means that students' courses and grades that they're taking actively appear on their californiacolleges.edu platform so that students can see those progress towards meeting those goals. And it allows them to pull their high school transcript information directly into the Cal State Apply application. We're also working with the University of California to build similar functionality in 2024. So just to show you guys what that looks like, I've got a little video on the next slide so that you can see it in action, and then share with Dr. Groma, my colleague from the CSU, about the impact that this kind of passage of data has had on the CSU and its students.
This video will briefly demonstrate the end-to-end process of importing coursework into a Cal State Apply College application. That end-to-end process has 3 steps. First, the student will link their accounts. Second, they will import their coursework. Finally, once the student has submitted the application, the transcript data will be available to CSU campuses. The preferred starting point for this process is by initiating an application to the Cal State system from within a student's account on californiacolleges.edu. Once the accounts are linked, the student will see an import button. The course information from the student's account in californiacolleges.edu, as well as their SSID number, will populate the application. Students can edit schools and courses, however, those edited courses will no longer be transcript verified. The A-G matching section will already be filled out for all courses that were A to G matched, corresponding to the green courses in the CSU eligibility tab in californiacolleges.edu, and students will need to match any non-A to G matched courses themselves, those that correspond to the yellow courses in californiacolleges.edu. Once the student has reviewed and submitted an application, the student and course data that make up that application are available to CSU campuses via a tool called WebAdmit. Here, you can see that the coursework that was imported from the student's californiacolleges.edu account shows as official.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And in terms of the impact that this process is having on students throughout the state, in the 2022 to 23 application cycle, which is the last completed cycle since our California community colleges are still actively working for applications for this 23-24 cycle, you can see that nearly 125,000 applications were passed to the CSU, nearly 195,000 passed to the California community colleges, about 50,000 passed to University of California, and about 32,000 FAFSA and CADA financial aid forms were launched using the data sharing offered through californiacolleges.edu. Next slide. And Dr. Groma from CSU, would you like to share a little bit about the impact for your students?
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everybody. So CCGI offers a lot of benefits to the California State University. We've had a long-standing partnership of over a decade of the integration between our 2 systems. So first and foremost, it helps students and families understand and track their CSU eligibility. It auto-populates the Cal State Apply application for students, which is a huge time saver for them. We know we work very closely with the Riverside County Office of Education, and they have tracked that it takes their students less than 30 minutes to fill out an application for admission using the auto population. We've also expanded our partnership over the last couple of years to pull data in at the end of the school year so that we can have official transcript data, not only in the initial application cycle, but also at the end of the academic year. So the long-term goal is to stop having to ask for paper transcripts at the end of the year and be able to use the information that's populated in CCGI. And then, of course, with a huge population of students that apply and receive financial aid, making sure that those students are doing their FAFSA and CADA application early so that we can give them an aid package early is also very critical to making sure that students understand that a 4-year degree is a possibility for them as they move forward and transition. Thank you.
All right. So now that we've had a sort of a chance to look at the specific case, I'm wondering if there are any particular questions that either of you have, either for Mary or for April about this integration. Okay, seeing none. What we're going to do now is transition it over to Erin Carter from Wested to really talk about some of the ways that we could take this example that was for high school information and apply it to the needs for both dual enrollment and for sharing information related to college transcripts. So go ahead, Erin.
Thanks, Kathy. So we're going to revisit 3 specific challenges we've touched on a little bit today that students face as they navigate dual enrollment, transcripts, and their college admissions applications. And then together we'll discuss 3 technology solutions that might be leveraged to address those challenges. Next slide. So the first challenge from our brief, students lack streamlined ways to report dual enrollment for college admissions applications. So colleges will require the official community college transcript for any coursework taken through dual enrollment activities. And like we heard earlier from Naomi, there's often confusion about which information appears on which transcripts are actually required as part of the college application process. And this might be particularly true for students who are engaged in dual enrollment activities facilitated by or at their high school. They may assume that that coursework is part of their official high school transcript and that nothing else is needed for documentation. So they may fail to obtain the required community college transcripts in those cases. Another challenge that students face is that there are a wide variety of ways that colleges process transcript requests and different ways that students need to order those transcripts depending on which college they attended for dual enrollment. And that also includes variations in payment requirements for ordering those transcripts. Next slide. The second challenge is centered around inconsistent transcription processes at high schools, which we heard a little bit about earlier. So currently this is inconsistent, and one of the issues that we do see is high schools incorrectly listing college courses as being high school courses in the CMP, the course management portal, which is that official source of truth database that's used by CSU and by the UC for verifying students' college eligibility or A through G coursework. And another challenge that we heard earlier, especially when students are independently enrolling in college courses, some of those courses meet A through G subject area requirements, but they do not appear on the high school transcript at all. And it may actually make it appear that the student did not meet those college eligibility requirements. Next slide. And the final challenge is that current data structures make it difficult to track dual enrollment course taking. So community colleges typically track dual enrollment at the student level versus the course level. They do this usually through the dual enrollment application process. and what's referred to as the special admit flag on the student record in those college information systems. So tracking it at the student versus the course level without understanding of which courses were taken by a student while dually enrolled can lead to a couple of challenges. One, it limits the FERPA permissible data sharing that might happen between a college and the high school that student attended. That would actually allow those high schools to see the college coursework that those students are completing, give them a more accurate view of what they have completed for more effective advising about their college eligibility status. And the second challenge is that without a comprehensive data set that includes both high school and college coursework, we're really limited in the types of research that can be conducted in the state that looks at dual enrollment course taking patterns. Next slide. So we're going to be looking at 3 solutions. We're going to be discussing these today. The first, we would send community college coursework data from eTranscript California to CCGI to create a unified high school transcript. And that high school transcript could contain those community college courses that were completed through dual enrollment activities. This would then give those high schools a more complete picture of what their students have completed so that they can give more accurate advising to those students. It may also support those receiving institutions to have a clearer look at which courses were taken at which institution. The next solution would be like we saw with the partnership between CCGI and CSU, to actually populate the CCC, CSU, and UC admissions applications with that verified community college coursework data so that students are not having to manually enter in all of that coursework in their admissions applications, which would hopefully reduce any chance of data entry errors or even missing coursework entirely. And finally, we could automate transcript requests directly from those admissions applications so that if a student indicates that they attended a college and received college coursework credit, we could automate requests to eTranscript California to request those official college transcripts at the time of application. So that would minimize confusion about which transcripts are required, when and how a student would need to order them, and also eliminating the cost to students. And I will hand it over to Kathy now for our interactive discussion.
All right. So the purpose of this task force is really for you all to identify actions that can be taken to address the challenges that have been identified that are especially related to eTranscript California. So what we're going to do is have you go to a Jamboard, and if someone could put that link into the chat for our task force members. What we're going to do is give you 5 minutes to go in and start to populate your thoughts about the 3 ideas that Erin just shared. So specifically, those are the idea that you would have community college coursework being sent over to the californiacolleges.edu tools so that they can have a complete transcript for students that are engaging in dual enrollment. The second is the idea that there's a link in the application forms for our public institutions to automatically have their transcript be provided with the dual enrollment records. And that finally, when students are at the end, they've been accepted by the college and they need to send that final transcript that proves that they've really taken all the classes that they needed to, that we could be using the infrastructure of eTranscript California to provide that. So for those of you who are not familiar, actually, if we could maybe switch the view, so we show the Jamboard. For those of you who haven't used a Jamboard before, basically there's a series of items at the top. So if you'll notice, there's like a little 1/8 box at the very top center. Thank you, Madi. So if you go and you click the little caret to the right, that will advance between slides, just like you're in a slide deck. So this is the first question that we'll be having you give comments on about whether those solutions are feasible and do they really solve the problems. If you go one more to the right, you'll see number 2. And this is where you can say what considerations are needed to make the changes. And if you click one more time to item 3, that's where you describe the supports that would be needed to make these changes. And the way that you make your comments is that over on the left-hand side, you'll see there's something that looks like a Post-it note with a little bit of a bend on the right-hand side right there. You can just click on that and it will generate a text that you can type into. So I am inviting our task force members to start filling out slides 1 through 3. And once again, I will remind you what are the solutions that we are addressing in the chat. Okay, I'll give you another 2 minutes. So I encourage you to hit that right arrow and make sure that you're giving input on the other 2 questions. So slide 2 and slide 3 as well. All right, I'm going to move us from sort of individual work to a bit of a discussion about these ideas. So Mari, if you could go back to the first one. I want to sort of flag some ideas that showed up here. So in general, people seem to feel like these were feasible, but there were some technical issues that got raised. So we do have Mark Cohen, who's a representative of the Tech Center on the call. I'm not quite sure if he can answer any of these issues. But one of the ideas was the concern of handling the load of real-time data calls to eTranscript during peak application season. So I don't know, Mark, if there's something that you would want to weigh in there on that topic.
The only thing I could weigh in is that the Tech Center currently hosts the CCC Apply application, which also has tremendous volumes during peak application season, which are handled appropriately. So I don't see that as an issue, though obviously something to build towards.
So that would be a really good thing to include in our design specifications of what a technical solution would need to handle. I also see a question in here that is the intention of having a unified high school transcript that community college courses would be applied to official high school transcripts. And would this conflict with the existing dual enrollment courses on the transcript? I don't know, Mary, if you've got sort of an explanation of what that might look like in practice.
Absolutely. I think that when we're looking at ways that dual enrollment coursework could be transcripted on the high school transcript, it would be to denote what is the course, what is the grade, and what is the institution that is issuing that credit. Then that would provide a unified look into what coursework the student has completed. It shouldn't conflict with information that would be on a community college transcript because it would be coming from the high school district itself in those instances where it was recorded based on the community college transcript, or in a future state, if we were to receive information from eTranscript California into a unified high school transcript, it would come from that source. So it should be at least not conflicting. Although I think that until there's a way in which we've got 100% scrape of dual enrollment coursework flowing into a unified high school transcript, there could be additional coursework not reflected in the transcript.
Any other thoughts on that topic before we move over to slide 2? Okay, go ahead and move the slide over. Thank you. So we've got some more issues here related to sort of considerations. So I think this has to do with the challenge that when a student takes a dual enrollment course, it becomes part of their college transcript. So maybe you thought you wanted to take a high school course and you didn't do well, and that could affect your grade point average going forward. So there's a couple of points here about this concern about students having the ability to opt out and not necessarily share their dual enrollment coursework information. I'm just curious to see if there's anyone who has any insight into that phenomenon of sort of the choice of sharing college data. So I guess one possibility is that if there were a design consideration that a student makes a decision about whether to share that information, that could be part of what is included in the transcript. I don't know, I'd be curious to hear from Mary about how you handle student choice about what gets shared in the context of high school course information.
Sure. So for receiving colleges, in order to be compliant for Title IV aid, they've got to ensure that students are meeting satisfactory academic progress, which is things like passing a certain percentage of courses that they've taken, and there are lifetime limits. So generally, college admissions processes are going to require that every college course in which the student has ever enrolled, regardless if they've received a grade or if they've withdrawn, that those transcripts be received. So systems like the National Student Clearinghouse, used to be known as the National Student Loan Clearinghouse, often are used by those colleges to ensure that they've received 100% of college transcripts to ensure that Department of Education compliance. So there is less flexibility for students to opt in or opt out of sharing on course records for that post-secondary undergraduate in order to meet those Department of Ed requirements.
Thanks for that clarification. So I'm seeing a lot of items here with concerns just about what is necessary for the technical infrastructure. So clearly we don't want to just be envisioning something that's not grounded in reality. Maybe it'd be helpful, John Hetz, for you to sort of clarify how the Chancellor's Office is thinking about updates to its existing tool and how input from this group might inform some of those questions about cost and scale.
Well, what we're hoping for from this group is really to kind of get the, all the requirements that the state needs for us to build to the next model of eTranscript, right? So our goal is to think carefully about, a full revision potentially. We've had a lot of challenges with some aspects of the current platform. And so our goal would be to be responsive to what everyone here is laying out as the things that we need to do. So being able to allow students to, the challenge is we'd have to have something at the intake in order for eTranscript to essentially represent and hold on to a piece of information that would keep students from, that would allow students the opportunity to turn things on and off. It was just functionality that we'd have to design.
So I'd like to invite folks who shared that concern on the Jamboard, if they have questions or other things that you want to state, so we're having a little bit of a dialogue here about sort of the technical considerations. Does anyone want to share your thoughts?
I can speak to that. Well, at least from the accessibility lens, we always need to make sure we don't discriminate against anyone. And with a disability, students will need to be able to access the software that's provided with screen readers and other assistive technology tools. So we just need to make sure that whatever is developed is fully accessible to students with disabilities.
Right, that's going to be a minimum requirement for anything that would be developed, for sure.
Beautiful.
Any other thoughts about the technical infrastructure? So another comment that I see here is a concern about how implementing automation is going to affect people who work in admissions and records. So given that this has already happened for CSU, I'm wondering, April, if there's anything that you can share about what this has meant for your advising staff.
So it definitely does not replace the need for staff. What it does is it allows staff to be redirected to be more student facing and support students in a more in a manner that students really need to be supported today, as far as getting them through the different processes from admissions to enrollment.
My apologies. I managed to knock my mouse off the screen, so I couldn't take myself off mute. All right, so thank you. That's really helpful to think about the positive implications of being able to have those staff allocated in other ways. Any other thoughts that people have about sort of the way that this could influence the staffing? We'll for the needs of different education segments. Hanmi.
Hi, yes. I was wondering, in terms of the staffing, if you add this technological solution, there would have to be some sort of support for people who have technical issues, like it didn't import correctly, or my transcript, I got somebody else's transcript. I mean, you know, we don't want that, but if that happened, you'd have to have some sort of operational support that's on call, like especially during the peak application period, 24/7, like really ramped up. You know, we experienced that, and the student behavior is that as much as we ask them to do things early and get prepared and not wait to the last minute, they wait until the last minute. And so I can see that while in concept, this is a great solution, that might just create a lot of stress in the last 24 hours before a deadline.
That's a great way of pointing out that when we're designing technology tools, we shouldn't only be thinking about the code, but thinking about the human interfaces that are there. Two of the things I want to note that have shown up in these comments is that there's a concern about how high schools annotate and integrate dual enrollment courses. So actually one of the things that we're going to talk about later today is that there's been an effort to create a common standard that includes high school courses and dual enrollment courses that would help to address this. So, and that's very related to our second topic today, which is the importance of having unified standards for how data gets annotated. So that is underway. And then there's a very interesting point that just got raised here, that CSU campuses also need to report dual enrollment courses. And that's a good reminder that we often think of community colleges as the provider of dual enrollment, but in fact, there are multiple types of post-secondary institutions that can enable students to enroll in high school while still in college while still in high school. And so we would need to figure that out. And as currently designed right now, we've just been talking about eTranscript and the concept of community colleges. That's a very important design consideration. We'll also tap into that in a little bit when we talk about a broader post-secondary standard. All right, so in our last few minutes, I want to get to the final area, so area 3, which has to do with what sports supports will be needed. And so what we're seeing here is that we need to have course crosswalks that need to be developed and kept up to date. So I'm curious about that. When you're talking about crosswalks, what types of characteristics need to be documented?
Yeah, so that was me. Just, kind of flagging that if we're thinking about how courses are going to apply for graduation requirements or meeting A through G, we just need to make sure that that is well maintained and carefully documented, because otherwise it won't work.
That's an excellent point.
Right. One of the things our system has occasionally run into is update challenges, especially as if something large changes. Going through and making sure all of the changes that need to be caught everywhere doesn't always happen with the speed and completeness that one would prefer.
And that seems to relate to this other comment of it. So we really have to make sure that we're providing clear information to students and parents and the advisors, the counselors that are helping them navigate these systems so that people are able to use them effectively. And it's a good reminder that just because you can connect underlying data sets, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem on its own. All right, so any final thoughts that people want to share from the task force related to these ideas of exploring an integration for passing transcripts for application, integrating high school transcripts to have it so it has dual enrollment information, and passing final transcripts through eTranscript California? Any other thoughts on those? Laura.
I would just share that it seems, I'm thinking back, I'm reflecting on the videos we saw of the students who took dual enrollment courses, that this would really lean into the equity piece and ensuring that students who maybe wouldn't have had access to these college courses before, wouldn't have thought of it, are gaining this credit and are getting the credit for the coursework that they've done, and that we're removing some of those obstacles. I think one of the other slides talked about how the transcript process differs from community college to community college. And if that's challenging for adults, it's certainly going to be challenging for our high school and first generation students. So this seems to be able to maybe automate and reduce some of those obstacles. So this is very exciting. Thank you.
I see there's one other comment that came in through the Q&A feature with a concern about that there are students who are taking courses at other institutions online through something called California's Virtual Campus. And so this person is basically saying that it would be important that we make sure that all of those transcript data points come together. And that actually is part of the model that we went over last time, with the idea that we could use eTranscript California to create a consolidated transcript for community college students, regardless of where they took the classes. So that is definitely part of the design considerations. All right, so what we're going to be doing with this information is using it to create sort of a series of considerations before advancing this type of movement forward. We can provide some ideas back as we continue to develop and hone our model. And the idea is that when we are finishing up in June, we're going to come up with a set of very specific recommendations. So they might be along the lines of, like maybe there's an endorsement of going forward with this, but in that endorsement that there has to be real clarity about what this means for workload issues, what it means for providing adequate supports for students so that they're able to get their questions answered and things like that that were raised today. All right, so if we can go back to our main slide deck. And by the way, task force members, you can continue to populate this Jamboard. And what we'll be doing is we will be consolidating all of your comments into the notes for today, so that in the future, if folks are coming through and want to be able to see this, that because a screen reader won't catch what's in a Jamboard, all that information will be available in the notes. All right, next slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about common standards. So this is actually the way that we're going to start talking about this issue of that there are CSU courses that need to be pulled in for dual enrollment, and the question of making a consistent way that information gets shared. So next slide. So one of the things that's really important to understand is the context in which we're trying to share information across institutions. So, you know, California is a local control state, which means that in our hundreds and thousands of institutions across the state, everyone gets to choose what kind of technology solution they want. And so as a result, the way information gets like put into local systems is often just a little bit different from one institution to the next. So one solution would be that we just buy one software package and we get everybody to use it in exactly the same way, but that would be prohibitively expensive, especially in a difficult budget year. And so the other option is that we create what would be like a Rosetta Stone that allows people to have the data in the format that they currently do in their local systems, but that it can be translated into a form that all systems can read. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the concept of transcript standards. So next slide, please. So when you have a common standard, there's a couple of things that result. The first is that you can give consistent guidance to locals about what they're supposed to be doing with their data to make sure it can be read by other institutions. And this is really important because when you don't have clear guidance, people try to figure out on their own and they may get it a little bit wrong, which means that the data that comes through these systems end up not being accurate. The second thing that it can do is it can enable us to ensure that the technology companies that actually code how the data gets stored locally can be brought into the loop so that we make sure that those vendors are creating the appropriate options that make it easier for folks on the ground to enter data in the appropriate way. It also allows us to account for times when information needs to change. So if, for example, there's a decision to change the way courses are coded or their numbering system, we can say, this is the way things were before this cutoff date, and this is how they changed afterwards, which makes it easier for us to make needed changes in underlying data structures, but still be able to track information over time. And then it also will help people in various ways. So it'll help the students because they're just going to say, yes, share my data. And we know that the information is going to be passed for them. CCGI sometimes uses an analogy that I think is really helpful, which is an escalator. So when you go to get on an escalator, as you're like, coming out of BART, you just see the steps and you hop on and you get to where you need to go. We have no idea what's going on underneath all the gears and things that are turning that makes it happen. And that's what we want to have be the case for students when they're passing their transcript data. And then, as we heard from April, it can be really helpful for institutions because they're spending less time hand checking the various things and they can devote their time to supporting students and counseling them on other issues. So those are the reasons that we want to talk to you about a transcript standard today. Next slide, please. All right, so rather than have me talk abstractly about this, I'm going to invite Mary Aguayo to come back on and describe a process that is just getting the finishing touches put on it, which is to develop a standard like this for high school data. So Mary, take it away.
Thank you so much. So as Kathy shared, we have been working on the California High School and Student Record Portability Standard for high school transcripts for public schools in the state. Next slide, please. So at CCGI, the reason that we've been working on the development of a high school transcript standard is because we are charged to provide transcripts processed in near real time to the California community colleges, to the California State University, to the University of California, and to the Student Aid Commission using an application programming interface. So in order for us to fulfill that requirement in EdCode, we knew that we needed to first define what constitutes a high school transcript, which is definitionally the standard, and where does all of the information come from? And so that is outlined in its associated data specification. Next slide. So what is the standard and what is the spec, as we call the data specification, and what do they do? So the high school transcript standard provides guidance for those California public high school transcripts that will be passed through CCGI. It details the required and optional data elements for that student record portability. A lot of the questions earlier in this conversation centered around dual enrollment, for example, do have a place in the standard. There is a field where the students' CDS code, county district school code, if they took a course at a California school with a CDS code goes. There is a field for a CEIB code is issued by the College Board, which would cover all of the colleges in the state. There's a field for the name in free text of the school that a course was taken at, so that we can be very clear and very explicit about the issuing entity for every given course. It includes, but it's not limited to those that would be contained in a traditional paper transcript. And it is intended for electronic data exchange. In terms of the spec, it's a supplement to the standard, and it contains all the elements that CCGI intends to ingest from our partner California Public Unified and High School Districts. It helps us create those transcript-informed tools on californiacolleges.edu, our platform. It supports those application integrations with the state's public higher ed systems, and it informs those transcripts that would be provisioned to the standard. Next slide, please. So in order for us to develop this transcript, we really started with looking at existing CalPads for any sort of mapping that was possible, because we'd like to be as aligned as it all humanly possible to be. CalPads has all of the student information, and in the standard on every single student field, we note, does this map back to the CalPads element in the CalPads definition? Absolutely. We did, however, recognize that CalPads does not contain transcript data, and so the elements that are transcript specific are unique to this standard. But we really wanted to make it as simple and clear and straightforward as possible by prioritizing that CalPEDS mapping. We looked at all of the elements that we wanted to include and exclude and really compared that back to our existing data specification, which helps us provide the application integration that was described earlier in this meeting with the California State University. We wanted to make sure that we were consistent with CEDS, the Common Educational Data Standards, which is the open data standard when possible. And we wanted to map our draft back to reporting needs like M6 for migrant data and potential operational uses like a possible CCC apply integration in the future. So we really took a big look at a lot of those elements to build a standard that was going to meet our constituents' needs. The draft standard was shared in November with systems partners, and we had a comment period through December 15th, where we took a lot of input, had a lot of meetings, walked folks through what is the standard, what is the specification, what do they mean, and what can we provide. And then we released an updated version on January 8th. The University of California, California State University, California Community Colleges, and the California Department of Education all acknowledged receipt of the standard, and the higher ed systems place their logo on the standard. The standard and the data specification are available on the C2C website in the materials for this meeting today, if you'd like to take a look at those. Next step. So to roll it out, we'll be working with the Cradle-to-Career data system to make sure that the standard and specification are in a spot on the website that can be versioned with time, because we know that all data standards are going to require that versioning. We'll be working with the California Department of Education to share the standard and its specification with the student information system vendors in the state. We need to make sure that the vendors that are working in the state all have good awareness of the information and have places to house the elements in their systems. We'll be working with our district partners to transition from our existing data specification starting in 2025. And we'll be working with the higher ed systems to provide final transcripts according to the standard beginning in summer of 2025. It will be all rolled out over the course of the coming years, but we do expect that this is a longer term play because it's going to take years for students' data to work through the system. So even if we roll it out, say in 2025, those students' courses and grades may not have been transcribed according to this standard up until that point in time. So it's going to take time to move it forward, and we recognize that fully as we work on this issue. Next up, Kathy, I pass it back to you.
All right. I think that one of the things that's really important when we're working with data and technical architecture is that recognition that things take a long time to happen. So I always feel like it's never too early to start because we know it's going to take a while, but it also means that there's space for us to make adjustments to address what the reality is as we start to really get data in a shape that allows it to be more easily shared. So this leads us to the final topic for today, which is the idea of developing a post-secondary transcript standard similar to the one that was developed for high school. Next slide. So again, as we're looking at this whole constellation of work, if you press the advance button, I think we have an animation that'll show up. So, yes, so this is the idea that we're trying to come up with ways to have the same standard applying to both community college courses and courses that are offered by other post-secondary institutions. So this both advances the use case related to the integrations that we need related to dual enrollment students, but it also begins to prepare us for the idea of creating a career passport. So as a reminder, that's the idea that we would be able to take everyone's academic records from multiple contexts, put them under the control of students where they could curate their history related to information they might share with an employer for hiring, which means that we have to be looking at more than just community colleges. Next slide. So currently, eTranscript California is using a transcript standard that is specific to community college coursework. but it's becoming out of date. So for example, CSU and UC are working on creating a common set of standards for general education requirements, which goes by the acronym CalGETC. So currently, eTranscript has the separate standards, IGETC for UC, CSU breadth for CSU. And the idea is that there's going to be a need to update this to reflect the new set of shared standards. But it's also a time when we could start to explore other use cases, like what we heard about earlier. If there are students taking dual enrollment courses at CSU, we need to find a way to loop them in as well. Next slide. All right, so click through. So the first thing that we could do is that if we had a shared standard, again, it doesn't require anyone to change the way they're housing things locally, but it does allow us to pass information more easily between post-secondary institutions. And this is really important for the independent colleges who up to now we've not been talking about, because they don't have one common portal like UC or CSU or the community colleges do, where transcripts can be shared. So by having a shared standards, the independents could elect to join in similar resources for students. Next slide. This would also be our chance to update. Actually, why don't you just go ahead and hit enter a couple of times so we see all of these. Those new CalGETC standards. There's also an opportunity here. There's all this work going on under the MAP project to articulate, have this credit for prior learning, and we could include those standards so that that type of credit could easily be integrated into eTranscript California. And then we could begin to look at other ways that we could address documenting the standard, like the sort of the concepts behind a course. We heard earlier from John Hetz that something like understanding A to G standards might be useful. Definitely having things for CalGETC. And so this is the place where we could create the mechanisms that would make it easier to flag those course designations appropriately. Next slide. So what I want to do is we're going to go back to the Jamboard. So you're going to go back to the exact same place you were before, but you're going to advance another slide to the right. So there we're going to be talking about what issues should be addressed in creating a universal post-secondary transcript standard and who should be involved in that process. So maybe, Mari, if you could share your screen back to the Jamboard and advance to slide 4. What I want to do is invite the task force members to add your ideas here. You can also feel free to unmute if there's ideas that you just want to share verbally. So I'll give you a moment on that. All right, I'm going to give you one more minute and then we're going to do a little bit of discussion. All right, so we've got a number of ideas that have been put on the table. So this is a really interesting one. The idea that we need to address what the minimum transcriptable unit should be. And this is when we're beginning to get into that concept of what might go into a career passport with the idea of micro credentials and skills. I also see some questions in here about how competencies could be added. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of unmute and share your thoughts about that and how you think that might fit into a standard.
Oh, it would fit into a standard, but I know we've had recent discussions on competency-based education and the division of courses into competency modules. And as that work continues to proliferate, we may end up with a discrete set of competencies defined for each course that a student might take, and those could be summarized on a transcript as an addendum for the use of employers. And so probably a standard on defining those competencies and how to code them into the system would be needed.
John, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I think Sam captured a lot of it, but I would just say clearly there is a lot of movement in the space of thinking about sub-course level transcriptable units, and not unit in the course sense, but like something smaller than a course, like a competency. And it's an opportunity for us, if we are defining transcript standards, to actually lead in that space in ways that I think educational institutions and systems have not done as much as we should have, especially given some of our core competencies in terms of defining standards for courses, for skills, for course outcomes. And it's an opportunity for us, set a meaningful threshold and design a process by which we could come to some collective agreement about which types of things pass muster versus this messy universe of everyone everywhere, providing credentials that may or may not be worthwhile.
We had a helpful question in the Q&A of someone sort of asking the difference between eTranscript for academic purposes and the career passport, which might be a helpful way for us to think about this. So the intention is that eTranscript is where things that are known to be for academic credit gets shared, and things that might be useful to employers but might not be accepted as academic credit would be in the career passport. The reason for having standards across the different post-secondary segments to populate the transcript, the career passport, is just more for simplicity, that all the academic records coming in will be structured in the same way, which makes it like less difficult to do that. But it seems like there would be a really important dividing line between what's considered academic and what's considered career related, so that we don't try to overstretch what eTranscript is doing to meet all use cases. So I'm seeing that there are people noting that there are colleges that are already trying to do things related to micro-credentialing, like UCSD. I'm seeing some very helpful pointers about the types of things that need to be part of the standards, like having a data dictionary. There's I think a useful question here saying that we need to make sure that standards don't drive curriculum. And I think that it's important to remember that the purpose of something like a standard is to document something that everyone's already agreed on. So it's just the way you code something as opposed to telling people how to teach. So that seems like a very important guardrail for developing potential tools. Going over to the list of who might need to be involved in developing a standard is that we're seeing that focus groups with students would be useful. That we should also be taking into account what's needed for California specifically. So when the eTranscript standard was initially developed, there was an attempt to look at what's needed for California, but that definitely would need to be refreshed. I'm also seeing that it would be beneficial to include representatives from admissions and registrar's offices from the public segments, as well as our independent colleges and articulation officers. So what my thought is that we could put together a small sort of subcommittee that could go ahead and start mapping out what a post-secondary transcript standard might look like. So this is not anything that is requiring adoption, but it would allow us to take a look at some of the considerations that you all raised today and just see what that looks like in practice, with the goal of maybe having something that's got some clarity by June, similar to the process that was used for the high school standard. I'm curious to see if that is something that you all would be interested in engaging in. And by you all, I don't mean you personally, maybe having you nominate an appropriate delegate for the constituency you represent.
Kathy, this is April. I would just say yes, affirmation. It also might be helpful to include the eTranscript California Steering Committee that's been temporarily put on hold as this moves forward, but they, many of those representatives have been on that committee for years, and there's been things that have been discussed previously in that arena as well.
That's a great suggestion. Any other thoughts? Okay, so I'll reach out to folks separately just to see if there's anyone you'd like to have involved in that process, and then we'll give updates in upcoming meetings. So let's move back to our slide deck to close us out. I know we're 3 minutes from the end. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so one just happy note I wanted to share. We heard earlier from Naomi that it can be challenging to find out who those students are that are independently engaging in dual enrollment. So there is work now underway between the Community Colleges Tech Center and the California Colleges Guidance Initiative, the host for California Colleges EDU, to be able to pass information on people applying through CCC Apply to be able to definitively identify who those students are. So this new exchange of data is going to go live this summer. It won't be retroactive, but going forward, we should be able to get a more accurate understanding of who those high school students are that are attempting to take community college classes. So an early win on this work together. All right, next slide, please. All right, so just to remind everybody where we're going next. So you'll get notes from this meeting. I'll be touching base with you about the transcript standards. And then next month, we're going to be looking at eligibility tools and advising tools. So you heard a little bit about the things that are available through californiacolleges.edu. We'll dig much more deeply into that. We'll also learn about the CSU Transfer Planner tool and look at ways that integrating eTranscript California could make those resources more effective for students. And that will then lead us on into the next month to talk more about credit for prior learning. And after that, competency-based education, where we can dig into some of those topics that you all were raising on the Jamboard in preparation for our meeting in June, where we'll be looking at draft recommendations for the master plan. So any comments or questions from the group before we close out today? All right, well, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We'll look forward to getting those notes out to everyone and following up. Have a great rest of your day.